So the first step I did was I downsampled your data, as you know how to do now, down to 512. Then I did, oh, this, by the way, has the same intervals selected that we selected before. I did the polynomial detrend as before, and the spatial interpolation filter. I went through all that again. And I just kind of did it in layers, like peeling an onion. So what I did was I set this value up here originally to 2000 microvolts per centimeter, which basically showed most channels with mostly flat lines because the sensitivity is really small when you make that number big. But certain channels would stand out as being outliers, and I selected those first. Then I applied that spatial interpolation filter, set this to 1000, and then a few other channels showed up, and I spatially interpolated those. Finally, I set it down to 500, and I may have selected a few more. So anyhow, these are the channels that I ended up selecting: AF3, F3, FC5. C1, P3, and CP2. Then I applied a digital reference to M1, M2, and then a digital IR filter from 0.1 to 40. And then at that point, I saved that result so that the digital IR filter would get applied to the whole data set, only warming up at the very ends. And so that's what I did. File, save time series. I just saved it to this file. And that's what this one is. So now I'm going to unload. Now this file, here's what I did. This file, I started off with the way you had it. So if I had to check these guys, then all these filters here are history filters from having saved this one here. Those filters are now applied. And now we're back. I'm just on a different scale. Obviously, I was at 500 before. But now I'm having applied these other two filters, which came later. Okay, so then what did I do? I started off with analysis, spatial component analysis, Infomax ICA, just as we did before, and then I ended up with this one. And I added it to the filter pipeline and enabled it. And now, initially, this is what I did. So these are all the ICA components, some of which now, presently, are selected. But before I selected these relatively few components, you can see grayed, a little slightly grayed here. That's the current setting. Before I selected those, I had all of them selected. And I said here, show time series. And when you show time series there, you can do file, save copy as, save, let's see here. Yeah, save component time series. Save component time series will save these. Now, originally I had all of them selected, and then then I'll show you what the result was. With all of them selected, I saved them to a new time series down here, and I called it a new project, because now, in a sense, we're no longer using these channel names. We now have, I'll show you what it is. So when I saved all of the ICA components, which, oh, by the way, I'd selected 41 of them based on the 99% criterion, this is what I got. Now all the channels are labeled ICA 1 through ICA 41, but as you'll see, this covers the same time span, and we still have these same event segments marked. Okay, so then what did I do? I did a power spectral density analysis on these ICA components. So that's what I did, file, power spectrum, and I just did consecutive. I think I did 2-second windows. That gives us half hertz resolution and so forth. Oh, and I did, what did I do? I selected actually consecutive within segments. That's what I did. And I selected these that we had made. Remember those. I selected all of them. Now, you might want to get more refined and just focus in on some of those, which I think would be a good thing to do. I selected all of them at this stage. You can definitely get more refined and select just some of them and just see which components are showing the most interesting power spectra in the intervals that you're interested in. By the way, since we've filtered the data already, you can just say interval of interest. We don't have to do this padding at this point. And that's what I did. I said next. I don't think I rejected anything here. I did not do retrend. I said finish. Okay. So what did that result in? That resulted in this file that I called PSD-ICA here. Okay, so now I'm showing it to you a bit with the components that I ended up being interested in. Okay, so what did I mean there? So when it completed, let's see, I'm viewing display options here. I'm selecting just a few components here now, but originally it had all the components. Let me turn them back on. And now you can see, now that we're looking at all the components, that most of these other components have this always with EEG, these low frequencies tend to dominate. They just do unless you filter them out. And we haven't applied a really rigorous filter to that yet. And but in one respect, that helps us to see these other components that tend to stick out. So, for example, this one seems to be one of the most interesting ones because this alpha, it's the only one that's showing this large alpha peak. This is ICA component. Now this is 10 hertz. It's showing this large alpha peak, and it's got over here also the largest peak in the beta band. So this is kind of interesting, this component here. And which one was it? Okay, so now let's go back and look at the channel array. Let me scale it so that I can see. Let's see, which ones do I want to look at here? Yeah, okay, so this one is ICA 18. I think ICA 11. Okay, so let me show you the ones that I found after sorting through all these. The ones that I found that I wrote down were the most interesting based on looking at frequencies in alpha and beta ranges. I found that ICA 11 was interesting. Okay, so that's the one that we're looking at there. It's got this peak here and this peak here. I selected ICA 15. Also has more than the others. I selected 22 and 30. I'm looking at a list that I made. I selected 18 and 40 and 14 and 28 and 35 and 34 and 31. Okay, so that's where we were when we came out. I selected those, and you know, some of these are smaller down here, but they're still larger than the ones I left out. So why did I do this? Well, you know, it's somewhat arbitrary, but you mentioned, Enrique, that you thought alpha and beta were interesting, and so that's definitely why I picked 11. But then I picked these others as well because they look like they have some interesting effects. So based on that, now that's for all of the intervals that we selected. You could definitely get more refined here. You could do it power spectra for the different kinds, like the scales or the resting or the what's the other one? The composing ones, and then you could overlay these and see which components are discriminating between them. I didn't do that. This gets to be a bit labor intensive, but you can definitely do that. But based on these components here, then what I did was I went back to this one up here. Now I'm going back up to the scalp, and that's where I selected these. Okay, that's where these came from. These ICA components that I just showed you, I selected those here. You can see ICA 11 is grayed out here. I say grayed out, but it's actually selected. 11, 14, 11, 14, 15. Now I've unselected them. So probably what I want to do is cancel and leave the selections I had in there before. Yeah, because you can see them here. Okay, so now these are included. So in this strategy I decided, well, let's not just exclude the artifacts, but let's go based on the ICA time series down here. So well, let's look at the ones that are interesting and just select those. The ones that are interesting presumably won't have artifacts in them, but they'll also filter out other things that don't have artifacts, but maybe they're not of interest in the maybe they're not the most interesting components that you're interested in. So anyways, other strategies are possible, but let me just show you that. Okay, so then having done that, I also added another digital filter here. And the reason above 4 Hertz, the reason I did that is because we can see all that activity below 4 Hertz. We saw that in these PSD for the ICA. So I just wanted to filter that out now. We could have done that up front as well, but we didn't. So now I'm doing it now because now I just want to say I'm just interested in stuff above 4 Hertz and these components that are selected. And now, having done that, now I don't really need to see the component time series anymore. So let's hide that. Now, having done all those things, I can increase the sensitivity of what we're looking at. And so now what we have is a reconstructed, this is now reconstructed data, but it's back at the scalp. And now that we're back at the scalp, we can do source estimation. And so here's what I tried. I tried something called LORETA, and we'll just do a quick and dirty LORETA with not a fancy head model, but just a spherical head model as a first pass here. So I go to something called source estimation, tomographic. I'm going to select LORETA. This is the original LORETA, which is low resolution electric tomography. This one, in spite of the name, LORETA is quite a bit different than LORETA. It was designed by the same person, Roberto Pasquale Marquis, who came up with the original LORETA. So LORETA is kind of his brand name, so to speak. So he's got another one called LORETA. All of his variants are called LORETA, even if they're quite different under the hood. And LORETA, going back to his original one, it looks for smooth solutions in the source space. And the source model, we can just use a lattice, just a lattice to cover voxels inside the head. And the forward method, let's just use a 3-shell sphere with some standard conductivities. Then I'll say OK here. And OK, this shouldn't take too very long since we're using a 3-shell head model. Okay, actually I already saved the LORETA inverse, but I just called it LORETA. I already saved, this is called an inverse operator. Let me just save it over the one I created before. It's already there. Okay, so now what you get down here are kind of like slices. So we're slicing in axial sections here. And what it's showing, so if I select a section of data, now you may or may not want to play with the events. You may want to hide all the event colors. You might want to, or not. But the important thing is now I'm selecting some data. So I'm going through here. Now here's where it gets into nitty-gritty details, and you could do so much here. Like you might look at that and say, oh, that looks kind of interesting. Let me select that. Okay, this is exploratory, right? So let me just explore that. Say display, refresh. Okay, so having selected this, and now basically what we're doing is the settings here says interval window average. So this is the average map over that selection. And so it's showing some spots there. Clearly, if you go somewhere else, let's say go to somewhere else, you might want to be guided by the segments that you marked or not, or by the time you're in here. You could go somewhere else. Say, maybe that's interesting. And say, display refresh. And now, this looks like it's going occipital. Let me pause for a second here. Okay, I had to free up some space there. Right, so now what you can do, you can save some of these. So let me just show you. We look at the MR viewer 6.4. You can bring this up. We can load the same workspace. Looks like that one. Okay, so I did some things before. Let's see. Now at this point in MR viewer, you're going to want to load a this volumetric image data. This is an average. This is an average brain. And why am I doing this? So we can, I'm just going to rearrange it a little bit. And I'm going to rearrange it. Okay, so now with this average brain, we can load one of your source maps. Okay, let me load one. This is one I made before from something, and this is for illustration. So now, but it shows that same source map, not the one I just selected now, but this is another one I saved. So back here, what I did was I did File, Save As, either source map or map data. Map data you can save like a movie, or you can save a successive. So you can save a succession of maps and play it as a movie. But the key thing is here in MR Viewer, now we can look at the map on an average brain. And of course you have to know where it came from. And there are many, many choices. I don't know. Here's looks like maybe a little bit of potentially that's close to posterior cingulate for what that may be worth. Something here looks like it's, notice here this is right. So this is radiological convention. So that's on the left, but that's on the, showing as a radiologist would see it, mirror image flipped. So this is really on the right side, and it looks like it could potentially be auditory cortex. This frontal lobe is also on the right side. Okay, for what it's worth, and there's a lot of exploration here, choices to be made, but I just wanted to show you how I was starting to play around with it. Now, another thing you could then do, if you find some of these maps that you find are interesting, you could set seed points in some of these and then use them subsequently for beamforming. Okay, but it gets complicated really fast. But I will stop right there.